And we're live.
And we're live. Hey, it's Seth, and I'm here with the extraordinary Natalie Nixon. And I want to start us off. Hi, Natalie. How are you?
Good. How's it going, Seth?
Great, thanks. This is such a weird medium. It takes a little while for me to get used to the fact that I'm not in a room by myself. We're going to talk about creativity, possibility, the practice, and our ability to do this work on purpose. Before we do, and before I give Natalie the proper introduction she deserves, here's my scary story. I have a book coming out in November. Uh-oh, we lost Natalie. Is she still here?
Everyone's still here. Do you want to bring her back?
No, yeah, whatever you want. I just thought
it was your riff. I was ready.
I have a book coming out in November about creativity. And so I get this email a few months ago saying, here's this new book coming out about creativity. Do you want to look at it? And that's like the worst thing in the whole world. Don't send me a new book about creativity because I don't want to. So I said, I'm really, really busy. I can't read it, which was true. And then the minute I finished my book, I read Natalie's book. And I am super relieved that A, her book is even better than mine, and B, there's almost no overlap between the two. So Natalie's book turned on a light for me. It is filled with profundity from beginning to end. It's not a long book if you're one of those people who need books to be not long. And I think it will stick with you for a long time. So I reached out to Natalie and I said, I didn't steal your book. I couldn't blurb your book, but I would love to have you join Taylor and I to talk about your book because it's available now and we need more creativity in our world. So with that said, hi, Natalie. How are you?
Hi, Seth. Hi, Taylor. Seth, thank you so much for inviting me and sharing your platform. This is awesome to see you, even through this medium.
So when did the itch start for you to say creativity is a skill and I might be able to help people?
It started as I built out my company Figure Eight Thinking First as a side hustle when I was still a professor. And I would do these consulting projects with companies that were trying to build innovation cultures, start an innovation lab. And I had this creeping sensation that we were going about it the wrong way. I felt like we were kind of talking over and around each other, throwing out the word innovation, and needed a sort of lingua franca. And but then I realized, in my opinion, we had to pause and take a step back and actually start with creativity, because I believe creativity is the engine for innovation.
Yeah. And I think your writing style is terrific. And you reminded me of some stories I'd heard before, like the Visa origin story, which I would love to have you touch on for a minute, but also a whole bunch of new ones. And I think that human beings have voluntarily brainwashed themselves into thinking they're not creative.
Absolutely.
And you're just completely pulling the blanket off of that one and saying, that's not the way it works. It's a skill.
That's right. It's a competency, and it's actually going to become more essential in what we're calling the future of work, which is here. We are, in the fourth industrial revolution. And, a robust, renowned organization like the World Economic Forum has projected back in 2016 that creativity would be among the top 3 job skills to have in the world. So to be human is to be hardwired to be creative. And so this book is an attempt to also kind of democratize how we're thinking about creativity, because I was also tired of us ghettoizing creativity in the arts. I decided to define, not just decided, I did quite a bit of research, and I'm a qualitative researcher, so a lot of conversations with a range of people. And I think about creativity as our capacity and ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems.
Right. And that dichotomy, I think, was the magic thing in the book for me. I had never thought about it so simply, and it's super profound because lots of us know people who are filled with wonder and have no rigor, and the opposite. And I don't think anyone's born filled with both or neither. And again, it's a muscle and we can learn how to use it.
Absolutely. It's a muscle. And it's about, I was listening to one of your episodes of your podcast, and you're talking about organized learning, right? Yeah. And it's something that we have forsaken in the way that we approach our cultures of learning.
Yeah. Let me bring Taylor back on because I know that she's got a whole bunch of questions she wants to do. And it's the interactivity here that makes it super fun. Taylor, what you got?
Yeah, so we're going to pop off of what you guys were just saying with wonder. So obviously that's a huge part of the creativity leap. And then also you talked a lot about, Natalie, this idea of traditional education and how that tends to kind of lose that sense of creativity and wonder that those curious kids have. So this question's from Rosie. So Rosie said, how can I find creativity again now as a mom of 4 kids with a pretty mundane job? I used to be so creative when I was younger. Can you both talk a little bit about how she can rediscover wonder and also creativity in her life?
So thank you for that question, Rosie. It's really inch by inch. It's small iterative steps. So I do something which I used to be embarrassed to say out loud, but now that I think I wrote about this in the book. I take daydream breaks. I did write about this in the book. I recalled how as a first grader, I've always been a mighty daydreamer. And daydreaming, we actually know now from neuroscience of creativity that it really helps our neurosynapses to rewire in a different way so we can do that deep marinating work that leads to those aha moments and insight. So I actually create timed daydream breaks during the day. If it's cold outside, I'll just stand by a window in a beautiful warm June day. I'm from Philly, so we have a front step stoop culture. So I'll sit outside on the steps and I'll look at the clouds, and that does, no pun intended, wonders. I know being a mom of 4 kids, it's like, where do you carve out the time? But if you can figure out a way to be a clumsy student of something, that's another awesome way to start to develop creativity. If it's 1 hour a week, what happens when we are clumsy students again? It inspires what I call the 3 I's around creativity, which are the way we actually exercise creativity. So it inspires inquiry and curiosity, because you have to ask so many questions to figure out, what am I doing wrong? How do I figure this out? It also triggers much more improvisation. And improvisation isn't about being a great comedic sketch artist on Saturday Night Live or the likes of Miles Davis, but it's about being adaptive, being in the moment. And then also it triggers intuition. And I'm now a clumsy student of the foxtrot and the tango. So that's how I try to exercise it.
So I'm going to just chime in with a couple other things. First of all, we have been tricked into thinking that doing something decorative is creative. It might be, but it probably isn't. And filling in the blanks and painting by number, if that gives you pleasure, please, it's a great hobby. But what we're talking about here is something that might not work. Yeah. And what Natalie's pointing out, which is the key core insight, is the smallest viable breakthrough is what you need to focus on. Don't think that you can reorganize the company where you work. They're not going to let you do it. But if you can figure out how to rearrange where things are on the receptionist desk so that things flow 7 minutes faster per day, no one's going to stop you. And if you're wrong, you can just go backwards, right? Those little tiny things, that's just as creative. It just doesn't have the same scale.
Absolutely. And it builds a momentum and a confidence in ourselves for what I call that creative competency. I love that example.
Yeah. Taylor.
We have dozens of people saying how much they love the phrase clumsy student of something. So very cool. All right, cool. This is a question from Derek that I think is going to apply to a lot of the people who are listening right now, given the state of the world. Derek said, how could I make my Zoom brainstorm sessions with my remote team more creative? I feel like in the office, there's such a different energy than online.
Well, I've been on Zoom quite a bit like everybody else. And, Seth and I, because I did, as I was listening to that episode, Seth, you ended it with this example about the almighty breakout rooms, which is like any tool. It's like a knife can cut butter or can hurt somebody. So the breakout rooms are a wonderful feature. It's a trust issue that people will actually go and do what the prompt is. I like to integrate a lot of prompts. I don't like to be the talking head. I like to make sure that people are having conversations. There's a whiteboard feature on Zoom, which I'm still rather clumsy with, but if you are the host and you go to share a screen, there's an option for a whiteboard room. Any opportunity also to help people doodle. I often start with a priming exercise. of just getting people to realize they can, in fact, visualize abstract information through stick figures and triangles and arrows and stuff. And then asking people to visually, through a doodle, respond to an idea or a question and showing it on the screen and asking questions in that way. So those are a few ideas.
Brainstorming in a corporate meeting setting is a little bit like comparing Kraft singles to cheese. And you can call it brainstorming if you want, but it's not brainstorming. Brainstorming is a very specific process, and most people have no clue how to do it. And the magic of Zoom run well is you can make it so it's better than that in-person thing you've been calling brainstorming. But in order to do that, you're going to have to, as a manager / leader, embrace the idea of shifting status roles, of giving people a voice, of coming up with moments of tension and release. And all of these things I've been living in Zoom for 5 years. And so if you're willing to turn things upside down, you will be amazed at what you can do. And I have seen thousands of people go through an exercise of coming up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ideas in a very short period of time. But that's not going to happen if you can't build trust first.
Can I build on your point about tension, Seth? Another tension that I've used in Zoom for ideating brainstorming is the role of silence. So I like to do something called quiet storming, and it's timed, right? It might be just 90 seconds, but this moment or moments scattered throughout where there's kind of you're part of this virtual interaction, but you're kind of going into yourself and thinking quietly to yourself. And it's this old pedagogical trick of think, pair, share. That's also a really cool way to break things up and leverage that tension you're talking about.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And just for viewers at home, if you think 90 seconds isn't a long time, the three of us are going to be silent for 4 seconds. Ready?
Okay.
Like my brain is going to explode. 4 seconds.
Yes. Challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was going through the alt MBA, we talked about silence a lot and this idea of who owns silence. So if I'm the last one to speak, do I then own it? Or am I talking to one other person and that person now owns that silence? Or is it just no one owns it because it just exists? So I think that's a really fun thing to play with, especially with brainstorming, because now you're suddenly all together. So at the end of 90 seconds, who's going to raise their hand and say, oh, I'll speak first?
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. We have so many questions pouring in. This is from Adil. So I'm going to go ahead and put it up here. Does creative have to be an untested new idea, or could it be simply a different way of executing an existing product or service?
I think the latter. I go to my teacher for all this, which is jazz, right? So much of jazz, it's incremental shifts that can make these exponentially different results and products. So it's product musically, I was speaking, but yeah, it's what's really new, right? It's all about the remix, which actually the hard work then is being super observant about what is, so that you can figure out what are you going to tweak slightly. And there's all sorts of cool frameworks to use to figure out how to tweak in order to make these more exponential shifts.
Yeah, you nailed it. What else you got, Taylor?
All right. So this one's from Charles, and I think this feeds in really well with Natalie's book. So it says, when we are serving when we are already serving the people we sought to serve, would they not want us to be creative? How can we delight them without disappointing them? So I think this goes back to innovation, this idea of, okay, if we've already got something that's working, do we continue to innovate, even though that may be a risk of this might not work or they might not like this?
Yeah. Charles has been in some of our workshops and I'm recognizing some of our language.
Oh, cool.
Great. Here's the deal. You do not want creative engineers at the Ford Motor Company coming up with a brand new power plant and putting it in your Ford Mustang in the middle of the night for when you go to drive tomorrow. That the engineering world is based on making promises and keeping them. And it's very important if we're going to build anything that matters, that we make promises and keep them. But it is also true that when you go out and buy a new record album from someone you're a fan of, you do not want it to be the same record album you bought the last time they came out with a record. You already have that one. So it's a different bucket. And the bucket is, this is the bucket of better, amazing, new, whatever word you want. This is the bucket of, we just made a promise and it's going to be here again tomorrow.
I mean, I think it just even goes into the fact of, Seth, your first book you wrote probably doesn't apply to the same people that, your 18th book appeals to. Natalie, is there anything else you want to add there? Because I have another question lined up.
Just that in any creative process, which is the engine for innovation, and innovation in my view is invention converted into value. That could be financial, social, cultural value. But at some point it has to end. You have to stop. And that's just the rigor aspect of it. Otherwise you diverge. At a certain point you have to converge and figure out how are the people we want to touch responding to it, and trust that, okay, this is good for now, and move on.
Yeah.
Love it.
All right, we'll take a couple more questions. This one's from Roland. How to keep creativity juice flowing even on a bad day?
I got one. You want to go first?
You go first, Seth.
Okay, so this is in my book, which is, some people say they have to be in flow and inspired to be creative. And other people say, I have to show up and do work to be inspired and be in flow. One way or the other, right? My friend Isaac Asimov wrote 400 books. He was never inspired. He just knew it was 6:30 in the morning and he needed to type. And
Yes.
once he started typing, that made him inspired. So I think the reason you're having a bad day is because you're not doing the work, not the other way around.
Amen. I love that you basically just mapped out the two corollaries I frame around wonder and rigor. The first corollary is that wonder is found in the midst of rigor. So whatever your rigorous thing is, for me, it's filing taxes or creating some ginormous Excel sheet or weeding, right? Wonder is found, there's like this aha wondrous moment that happens in the middle of the tedium. The second corollary is that rigor can't be sustained without wonder. So sometimes in some organizations, there's in these efforts to build cultures of innovation, there's a lot of this churn going from meeting to meeting and procedure and the rule book in the efforts to build innovation, but that's not sustainable. We must design space and time for the wonder, which is all audacity, pausing, all that good stuff.
Beautiful. Absolutely.
All right, we'll take two more questions, and one of them's going to be from me. Because I really wanted to ask this. So both of you have talked about this, and Seth, it's in your upcoming book too, about improvising and improv. So, you both kind of talk about how that can be helpful for creativity, is to kind of get outside and be in a space where you're no longer have those rules or instructions of what to do next. So can you talk about that a little bit and why that's needed and important in work?
This is all you, Natalie. You go for it.
So au contraire, we actually do need some rules in improvisation. We do, because the beautiful, one of my rigor mentors, I never met her, but she's still my rigor mentor, is Twyla Tharp, the amazing American modern dancer and choreographer Twyla Tharp. And she famously said, you have to start with a box to think out of a box, right? And improvisation, all incredible jazz musicians know music theory, they practice incessantly. Even the composition has a minimal structure. It might be a beginning, a middle, and an end. So improv is not pulling something randomly out of your armpit. It's not doing whatever you feel like, right? Like there have to be some minimal structures and boundaries, so you know what to move against and push against. Whether that's in dance, comedy, figuring out a different marketing strategy, figuring out a new financial model. We need some minimal structure so we can push against, rebound, and for the counterpoint.
Yeah.
Love that. All right. So hard picking questions. There's so many. Okay, we'll go ahead and do this one. Last question from Gustavo, I think. Is that how you say it? Gustavo?
I think so.
Okay, cool. What would be examples of doing the hard part first, emotional labor, and dancing with fear, which are all very akimbo Seth terms that we use, that create the conditions for creativity to grow? So these all kind of talk about that, doing that hard thing, and then how does that create creativity?
Yeah, I think creativity is not a fragile flower. Creativity is a well-developed muscle. And this myth that the world has to be all calm and right, and I need to feel just okay, then I'll be creative. That means you haven't done the prep, and it means you don't understand the concept. And if you're on a team with 4 people, buy 5 copies of Natalie's book and have everyone read it. And then just practice the muscle. Come up with really creative solutions to irrelevant problems so that you've stripped away the scary part. Okay, now, the 3 things you said, do the hard part first, emotional labor, dancing with fear, bring them back on because the muscle doesn't change, right? You can't say I'm a marathon runner, but I only run downhill. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, no fragile flowers in creativity. And I would also just kind of bring that question, thanks for that question, Gustavo, and Seth's answer to this current moment. Days of uncertainty and chaos are designed for creativity. And this moment that we're going in, whether we're talking about this global health pandemic of COVID or the social injustice protests or social justice protests in the United States of America, we have been afraid of doing this hard emotional labor, which for me would just start with conversations, right? That's where it would start to generate some creative direction into how we can really come together in spite of our disparate parts in our country.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brilliant.
All right. Well, on that note, Natalie, do you mind just sharing for anyone who is listening, how do they know if this book is something for them, if they should be reading it? Who's it for?
Gosh, if you feel stuck, read this book. If you know that it's almost like an itch you got to scratch, that you really want to amplify the creativity in your life and your work, this book, I hope, and I've been told so far, it's inspiring. It's also, I also include some practical tips. There's a discussion guide that I've developed. Please contact me at natalie@figure8thinking.com if you want to receive a copy of that. Sign up for my newsletter. And all of this information is on figure8thinking.com. And most of all, I'd love your feedback. I'd love to continue this type of conversation. Oh yeah, also, I went as far as creating a card game called the Wonder Rigor Discovery Deck.
We love card games.
Yes.
Yes.
It's really awesome. Let's check it out.
Where's my deck of cards? Here it is. At all times. They're like just pretty. But yours has words on them. Mine just have pictures.
Mine have pictures and lots of good questions.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Yes, Taylor?
Yeah, I would just add that I love how in your book, it's not only getting your perspective, but you interview so many different people. It's so cool to hear from so many people in such a condensed short book as well, where you're able to really get that perspective. So thank you for bringing it into the world. And I'm excited for other people to read it.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Seth, so much for sharing your platform. This was an amazing chat. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You guys are great. Go make a ruckus, everybody. Be well.
Go make a ruckus, guys. Hang on. Here's our bumper.
You're a superstar. You're just